Okay, so this is part 2 of chapters 5 through 7. This is a short enough section where I'm breaking this down in a video. Later on I may do this live, or I may post other videos if this is pretty successful. But if you have not seen part 1, go back and look at part 1 first, because it does set up plot points and all of that other stuff. But this is a continuation of the previous one that just goes over some additional points. Okay. So, one of the things to think about is how the story is tied into this larger idea of narrative. And again, that term again, right? We've encountered that a few times, and you just went through a midterm where I think I specifically asked you about the idea of narrative in the sense of not beginning, a middle, and end, but in terms of how narratives gain power over us, right? But in this case, this is about history, right? So if we think of narrative in terms of history, or what is officially understood to be authoritative, I think hopefully you can start to make the connection between all that stuff we've talked about before with social scripts and narrative can come into a little bit of focus in the context of history, and how Blood Meridian, no spoiler alerts, but how Blood Meridian can work to act as a counter-history. That is maybe a new concept. What is history and what is counter-history? Counter-history are histories that compete with the official history. Okay, so what that means is I will go over some of these notes, and I'll try and clarify that for you. Okay, so history is written by the victor. The person that wins is the person that gets to write the history. That's not a new concept. That's actually almost a cliche. So if you haven't heard that before, let me introduce you to this concept. But one of the things about history and how it's written down is that people that do the dirty work don't care. They only know about money. Okay, so if most of the history in this book, if it's trying to tell you the truth about the American Southwest and the American expansion, it wants to undermine the idea that these people that did the dirty work existed, right? Didn't exist. What we want, and what that video that I introduced you to a couple of units ago, the idea of manifest destiny, elbow room, remember? In terms of manifest destiny, it's easier to cast yourself as the good guy when you erase all of the things that made you look bad, okay? And I think that's as simple as I can make it. So one of the things about histories like this one, even though it's not an official nonfiction, but it is based on a lot of nonfiction, and I'll go over that a little bit later in the semester when we cover more of the book. One of the things about this history, or even Native American histories, and there are very many, I actually introduced you to some native narratives from the native perspective as we go through Blood Meridian. I think that's helpful. They work as a counter-history. They undermine the authority of this official narrative that there were good guys and bad guys, and the bad guys just kind of either you portray them as bad or you just make them disappear, right? Undermining that decreases the power of that single narrative, okay? But one thing that happened, and I don't think I'm treading on anybody's toes necessarily, is those that carve up the spoils need to legitimize that which is gotten through illicit means. In other words, there were a lot of slippery things going on, right? You know, that I don't know if you've heard the term, nobody wants to see, how laws are made. Laws are sort of like sausages. You don't ever want to see how they're made, but all you know is that they come out as sausages and you eat them, and then, for some people they're delicious. But you don't ever want to see how they're made, because otherwise you'll never eat another sausage again. Okay, laws are the same way. You never want to know how they're made. And now that we're a little bit more transparent about how laws and elections work, we may be a little bit less inclined to think that they are pure as the driven snow, and we question them. Okay. A single history in that sense works much better than multiple histories that are competing with each other. Okay, even if the truth is that there's all these different perspectives on history, you need to wipe out as many of those as possible if you want to create the one legitimate history that everybody's going to look at. Okay, that's just sort of common sense, right? That's logical. If there's only one history, then there's nothing else to undermine it. But wiping out other histories, by wiping out other histories, it's easier to control and legitimize your history as truth. Okay, and truth is that objective standard that we have where this is what actually happened. And hopefully by now we've lived in a postmodern age enough for you to know that history is not always everything that happened, right? It's not everything that happened by definition. Otherwise, it would take, I don't know, reliving it in order to understand it. But you make a selection when you write a history about what perspective you're going to have, what details you're going to add and delete, all of those things, right? So along those lines, not exactly the same, but then moving on to another lens that you can look at this through, is you may also start noting how religion is treated. There's a lot of abandoned missions. They're very evocative image, that may signal a little bit of abandonment of religion. There is an ex-priest character, and he tends to still believe in God, and he seems to believe in a lot of things that he believed in before, but he's got a much more cynical idea about how all that God stuff works. Okay, and I don't mean to belittle it, but when I say God stuff, he seems to have a perspective that's sort of post believing it very innocently. Okay, I'll just put it that way. Later on, we figure out a little bit more about his history, but for now, all you know is that he used to be a priest, and now he's really, really, really not a priest. Okay, so in this case, one narrative seems to be in competition with another. What do I mean by that? I mean that if religion is a powerful idea of a story that can be told. So if you tell something through the perspective of religion, history through the perspective of a particular religion, that has a power because religious belief has a power. It has an authoritative power. And so if you're trying to legitimize sort of a nationalistic perspective, right, religious history can sometimes get in the way of that and vice versa, right? So that's one thing to note, is that religion seems to be treated as sort of in this sort of, we need to do all this dirty work, but if we start getting this morality in the way, then we can't actually do what we're supposed to do, right? Which is wipe out all the natives and take things over, right? And then maybe go to war with a couple of people and slaughter some villages, and we need to move on. But if we start getting into all this religious hubbub, that'll get in the way. So in this case, because of all the chaos that's going on, religion needs to be subsumed by that wave of violence that's being legitimized. Okay, so either the religion needs to adapt to all of this viciousness and amorality, or this amorality needs to adapt itself to the religious belief system that they claim is still in existence, but in reality it doesn't really have a place. Okay, so that's what I got for you right now. This one's a little shorter than the last one, so I'm hoping that you'll look at both of these in the light that I intend, which is to illuminate things. They're not designed to be plot summaries. There's a lot of things that I didn't necessarily cover that it would be perfectly okay for you to talk about or explore, examples that you don't need to use all my examples. You can just sort of take them as they're intended, which is to offer you a lens to start thinking about the novel as a whole. Okay, so hopefully you've gotten far enough now where you have your own perspective and opinions as a reader, and then this will probably help. I'm hoping, and in my prior experience, these kinds of lectures, even though they get a little bit dry and detailed, if you haven't read the book, it's probably not very interesting. But if you have read the book, a lot of people that I know that have really been confused by the book have appreciated it, this little sort of hand-holding session. So that's kind of all it's intended to do, okay? So once again, not comprehensive, but I do think that this gives you a perspective on how I'm viewing the book and the ideas that I think are starting to emerge in context with the things that we've talked about in class. Okay? So, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your patience, and